Well, I have so many better ideas than this, but I'm just feeling kind of. I don't know. I guess this is why I make these videos, right? Because I struggle and I have no one to talk to about it. Because if I talk to a human about these things, people just sort of like, yeah, well, no shit, no shit. You feel this way. Everyone feels this way. You want to feel like the feelings you have are somehow unique, and they're just not. People don't want to hear your own personal perspective on the same crap everyone goes through. But anyway, the reason I say that is just because, I spend a lot of time. I think ever since I turned 40, a lot of these videos have been about the aging process. You know, it is hard. It is hard getting old, let me tell you. You know, I don't know. I think it's not as hard. Maybe it's hard for me anyway. I think for a lot of you, it's probably not as hard as it is for me. I never wanted to be old. I think a lot of people don't want to be old when they're young. I fantasized about being in my 20s, maybe early 30s at the latest, but I don't think I ever had any fantasies of myself at age 40 and above. Because the reality of fantasizing about yourself above the age of 40 is that it's a lame fantasy. Why would you fantasize about yourself being over the hill? There's absolutely no reason for it. I don't think I ever wanted to imagine myself this age, and I've already passed the point of no return, and now I'm in it. And it's I think it's easier now than it's gonna be. I keep saying that. I expect much bigger challenges in a lot of ways. I think this will be as good as it gets. That's the saddest thing about getting older is you know things if things aren't great where you stand when you get to be 40, then you're looking at diminishing returns. And if things aren't great now, and I should be, it's like some part of you, it's like, if I was brave enough to kill myself, you know, then I'd know that this. It's like kind of like, it's almost like you looking ahead at the sort of the pathetic nature of getting old. Life makes a mockery of you the older you get. Um, your appearance gets worse and worse. It's subtle, but it's always moving in that ugly direction. Um, you watch your family die, um, and you watch your chances with attractive women dry up and more or less disappear, unless you're rich or you know, yeah, unless you're making a ton of money or have a ton of status. But what this video is about is, you know, in some ways, you even start to die before you're dead. If I'm not going to kill myself, but I can understand the attractive proposition of, a lot of like rock stars or whatever, they quit while they're ahead, or pro sports stars, they quit while they're, before they've gone downhill, kind of, hanging on and clinging on and watching everything deteriorate. And it's sad. It's a sad thing, but I'm finding it especially sad these days, in the modern world, because the rate of change is great these days. Um, it's like I'm sitting around upstairs watching ESPN, and it's like I'm realizing like these people on ESPN are probably like concerned for their jobs. I don't know, maybe nobody is watching real TV anymore. It's like I think in the past, at least, there were things that the generations shared. People from the 50s probably felt the people from the 70s and 80s or whatever taking their place. But at least they still watched television. They still watched football. They still, went out to see music, and they still, went to parties and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's not that people don't do that now, but it's like, the stark contrast of, me, my generation watching TV. Young people don't even watch TV anymore. They're watching videos on YouTube. That's it, you know. And it's like you see the things that you were sort of a part and parcel of your life, things like knowing musicians and being a musician, So few kids are musicians. So few kids care about music, the urge for people to be musical, it's still there here and there, but it's largely died out. It's not the same, you just don't see it. People don't go out to see live music much anymore. If they do, it's, bands that were successful years ago. I mean, I guess people, I never went to go watch pop stars. People are still going to see pop stars now, just like they used to, and rappers. But I'm not a part of that world, and, I more went out to kind of see smaller shows. I'm going on New Year's to see some music. Um, and there'll be people there, but they'll all be old people, There'll be no young people there. It's not a band that young people like. And it's almost like, you see the people around you, everyone's so old, and you realize, how much time do you think to yourself, how much time do we have left? And, I made that whole Skibbity toilet video. This is what, I said it was just stupid, and I still think it is. But the reality of the matter is, it's threatening to me because it's kind of like, it's so foreign to something that my generation would watch, Skibbity toilet videos, that it feels like you're being erased somehow. Like you're watching society change to the point where all the things that you once valued and held dear, you see them become irrelevant. And as you're seeing that, you're also seeing people just get to the age where your parents get to an age where they could die any day. You see your friends, and they're all gray-haired and have grandkids, or kids that are grown. You know, I don't know. It's like I don't know. I hung out with some younger people over Christmas, and I was able to talk with them. Friends of the family, I suppose. Nice people. It wasn't like I felt like that they were very respectful and nice to me, and that was nice. It was nice to be acknowledged by the youth today. It shows that there is still some ability to connect with people. But it also just made me feel ancient, seeing these young people not being able to imagine kind of what they're going through in their lives. It's like, I don't know. It's like, for a long time while I was working at the co-op, I was sort of surrounded by young people and was sort of able to delude myself, having just only turned 40, into believing that I was still somehow one of them, that I could be fun and young and have a good time. But after my experience at the co-op, and the way it ended with, the young cashier that I foolishly, had a crush on, I look back and think how silly that was, and just come to the realization that I am old. I can't be living in that world anymore. It's really, even if I were to be successful in dating somebody that young, it would just feel wrong. It would feel wrong, and everyone would judge me for it, and it's just not right. It's not how the natural order functions. When you're my age, you're supposed to be dating women around your age. You're supposed to have friends around your age. You don't watch Skibbity toilet videos. You can, but you're kidding yourself. That's not your, it's you've had your time to define your time, and you're not watch. It's like I do watch too many YouTube videos, so I guess in that way I'm connected with the youth. But I miss the days when Sports Center was what it was all about. As a kid, teenager, and it was Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick, that's better content than what's on the internet now. You got a bunch of freaking kids that don't know how to be funny the way they used to. I watch some of the online sports stuff, and some of it's kind of funny, but it's just like it's not what it used to be. It just doesn't represent you anymore. It's like everything in the world starts to fade away from things that were familiar to you. Everything becomes more unfamiliar. It's kind of a new presentation. That's probably, I mean, I'm sure that's a big reason why the parents of the baby boomers hated rock and roll, because it wasn't just that it was, I mean, their parents' generation still enjoyed sleeping around. It was just much quieter. They still enjoyed, they still had dirty references and things like that. I'm sure the baby boomers' parents, the stuff that they were doing was even more scandalous to their parents before them. But the bigger problem with rock music for the parents of the baby boomers was probably just that it represented something new that reminded them of their mortality. When you see these new things come along, and especially these big changes like AI, seeing all these AI videos, something that just could not exist during my heyday. And during my heyday, I wanted to see legalized weed cafes. I thought that'd be great. Hang out, meet people, and I didn't feel natural in an environment. I didn't like to drink that much, and I wasn't natural in an environment where dancing was encouraged. I thought, oh, if they had weed cafes, I could go get high and have conversations with people. You're more likely to have silly conversations with people after smoking weed. That sounded more fun. Now it's like it took all this time. Finally, they're passing a law in Massachusetts to make weed cafes legal, and I'm too old to care about meeting people anymore. It's not going to be for my generation. It'll be for the young people that are looking to hook up, in the current generation. So it almost just feels like, it's sort of like that whole phenomenon has now left me behind. I can still go to the weed cafes. I can still talk to people. I can still be silly. It just doesn't hold the upside anymore. It's not exciting like it used to be. Life used to be exciting. When you're young, life is exciting. When you get older, it just, there's so little that's, it's like, I don't know. The funny thing is being around young people and feeling accepted by them is like as close as you get to excitement. Because for a second you can sort of make yourself believe that, somehow you're still young again, but you're not. It's crazy. That these people are living a very different life than you, and they're nice to let you hang out in their world. They're way cooler than you are. I remember being that young and hanging out with older people, not minding hanging out with them because I felt like, well, everyone, when you're young, everyone's cool. Not everyone's cool, but you're down to hang out with anyone. You're open to experience. You get older and it's just kind of like you look back and you realize how naive you were, how much you took for granted your situation, how the value of being young and having excitement still at your fingertips. Excitement is a thing, and it's hard to find excitement when you get older. Everything just becomes less exciting. Everything just you become more cynical. You've seen everything 1,000 times. The culture doesn't speak to you anymore. The slang, you gradually, you sort of know the slang, and then you know it less and less until now you're one of these old people that's like, what is this? I learned about 6'7" probably, years after kids were doing it, and I never liked slang, but it was kind of like, you start to feel like, oh, I'm one of these old people who's just finding out about what this means now, not that I care, I know what 6'7" means now. I don't even know if people are even using it anymore. For all I know, that it could be 5 years old, I know I found out that I'm finding out about it when the old folks are finding out about it, then I'm one of them now, Now they're overusing it. I don't even want to say it anymore because there's nothing worse than old people using slang years out of date, Who knows what the kids are saying today? I'm not going to find out for at least another 3 or 4 years. But, it's like the culture is changing so dramatically. And I don't know. I feel like I'm watching myself be deleted. When my parents go, that's going to be a major one. That's the biggest thing that I dread, seeing my parents go. Um, they have dogs that are older. I'm worried about seeing the dogs go. I already had to watch two dogs go that I lived with for years, so you'd think that these dogs wouldn't be as serious, but it's kind of like I've formed a strong bond with a couple of them. I don't want to see them die. I just don't want to see my parents die. It's freaking me out. I love them so much. They're the most important people to me in my life, and I'm not going to have any kind of connection that it's even remotely that close with anyone once they're gone. It's just and that on top of feeling like the things like I don't know, somehow the NFL's still popular. I could see that becoming less popular too. NFL's still popular now, so being a Patriots fan, I can at least feel connected to culture a little bit. But you can see that it's like the game is so different now. Today, someone like tackled the quarterback, and it was roughing the passer. And it's like the league is trying to make this game into a safe game, but the reality of the matter is it's not safe. People are getting concussed, and I shouldn't be an NFL fan. It's kind of inhumane. People's brains are being permanently damaged, and I'm rooting along for it, and it's just like I've started a sports channel to talk about it, and some part of me feels guilt because it's like, you didn't think about those things in the old days. It was just like, yeah, a hard hit. Oh man, look at that. The guy just freaking went limp, It's like back then it was exciting to see someone get the crap kicked out of them on the field, You didn't realize what it meant. Now it's just kind of like you can't even sack the quarterback. Now it's like, well, how much of this game, and then with all the betting that's going on, you're kind of like, how much of these games is being decided by the officials? So many of these calls that the officials make can totally change the outcome of the game, and they can, how can you trust these NFL owners to get it right? How can you trust these refs to not be influenced by the enormous sway of the gambling industry? Football was better before gambling came around. I effing hate these FanDuel. Anyway, it's more topics. It's just like everything that I hold dear is just that's what happens when you get older. You kind of watch the things that were institutions growing up, things that seemed to matter to you and matter to everyone around you, and it's like they sort of become. I was watching the thing on CBS Sunday Morning about the Rockettes. Somehow the Rockettes keep going. But you have to feel like on some level, like, well, it's going to end eventually. People aren't going to still keep going to see the Rockettes, 20 years from now, right? And you see a lot of things like that, like going to Friendly's as a kid, Friendly's is bankrupt. I don't know. There's still these zombie Friendly's restaurants, and it's funny. I don't even really want to go anymore. Just sad, because it just feels like it feels sad to go and not see it filled with people like it was when I was a kid. Um, you know, I don't know. It's just so many of the things that I identified with as a young person no longer exist for the modern generation in the same way, and it just feels like you're slowly being erased, like Marty McFly and Back to the Future. As each cultural touchstone becomes loses its luster. It's like watching yourself become non-existent in slow motion, and it's sad. It's painful. So yeah, this is another really depressing video. I guess I'm just not in a great mood. I needed to talk to someone about the fact that I was feeling more and more irrelevant as the days pass. And I just, I have no dreams. I have no dreams anymore. When you're young, you have dreams. You get to a certain age and you realize that most of your dreams aren't coming true. You're forced to form new dreams that are a compromise, that are absolutely not nearly anywhere near as grandiose as what you once dreamed of. And you just realize that, it puts your life into perspective. You're a blip. You're a blip in a long history of blips. You're not Einstein. You're not, Tom Hanks. You're not, um, Albert Schweitzer or whatever. You're just some schlub, like billions of schlubs before you, going through the motions and watching yourself like Marty McFly fading out of existence. And it doesn't matter. What you do doesn't matter. If you haven't changed things already at this point, you're not going to change things much more. You're going to fade away. I don't know. That's probably a pretty fatalistic way to look. I'm sure there's probably a more positive way to look at things, but I'm a cynic and a nihilist. This is where I'm at. Hopefully you have a better outlook on this than I do, but this is what I'm sharing for today. As I continue to fade, this video, evidence of my fading away. Goodbye, 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 goodbye.